I never expected that the worst cold of my adult life would change everything. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't the fever or the bone-deep aches that rewrote my future. It was a bowl of soup, brought over by the one person I was trying my hardest not to think about. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? The biggest moments are disguised as the smallest gestures. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 27, working as a freelance web developer from the quiet solitude of my one-bedroom apartment. My life ran on a predictable, comfortable schedule. Wake up, code, eat, sleep, repeat. It was a life built for one, a fortress of routine designed to keep things simple, to keep the messy parts of human connection at a safe distance. Loneliness was a familiar ache, a low hum beneath the surface of my days, but it was a predictable ache. I preferred it to the sharp, unpredictable pain of disappointment. My apartment, number 3B, was my sanctuary. It overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street that was usually peaceful, save for the occasional rumble of a truck or the distant wail of a siren. I knew the rhythm of the building, the creak of the floorboards in the apartment above, the time the mail carrier usually came. And I knew the sounds of apartment 3A, the one directly across the hall. That was Caleb's apartment. Let me explain about Caleb. He had moved in about 6 months before my fateful cold. The first time I saw him, he was hauling a ridiculously oversized leather armchair up the stairs with a friend, both of them laughing and sweating. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt. His dark hair was a bit unruly, and he had the kind of easy, confident smile that seemed to come naturally to some people, but felt like a foreign language to me. He looked like the captain of a football team or a guy who spent his weekends hiking in the mountains. He did not look like someone who would ever notice his quiet, nerdy neighbor across the hall. I saw him mostly in passing. A quick nod in the hallway, a shared, silent moment waiting for the elevator. He always smelled faintly of sawdust and something clean, like fresh laundry. I learned from brief snippets of conversation overheard through his open door that he was a carpenter, running a small business building custom furniture. It fit him perfectly. The idea of him, with his strong, capable hands, shaping raw wood into something beautiful and functional. It was an image that took up more space in my head than I was comfortable with. He was, in my carefully curated internal catalog of people, firmly filed under unattainable. He was friendly, sure, but in that universally pleasant way that doesn't mean anything. He'd say, "Hey man, how's it going?" And I would mumble something back, my heart doing a stupid little flip-flop in my chest before I could tell it to behave. He was the sun, bright and warm and full of effortless energy. I was more of a planet, orbiting at a safe, unnoticeable distance. My routine was my armor. It kept me from dwelling on things, from wanting what I felt I couldn't have. I'd hear him leaving early in the morning, the solid thud of his work boots on the landing, and I'd already be at my desk, the blue light of my monitors casting a glow in the dim room. I'd hear him come home late, sometimes with friends, the sound of their laughter echoing in the hall, and I'd just turn up the volume on my headphones. We were two different worlds, separated by a few feet of hallway carpet and a universe of temperament. And I was fine with that. Or at least, I told myself I was. I had my work, my books, my quiet evenings. It was enough. It had to be. To hope for more, to imagine a bridge crossing that hallway, felt like setting myself up for a fall. So I observed from a distance, collecting harmless details about this man who was a complete stranger and yet felt like a fixture in my daily life. The way he sometimes whistled when he was locking his door. The scuffed-up state of his boots he'd sometimes leave on his doormat. The fact that he got a delivery from the same Thai place every Tuesday. These were the safe, impersonal facts that composed my knowledge of Caleb. And that was all I thought it would ever be. It started with a tickle in my throat. I dismissed it as allergies, then as the result of a bad night's sleep. But by the next morning, there was no denying it. I was sick. Not just a little sniffle, but a full-blown, knock you on your back, everything hurts kind of illness. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, my body ached with a deep, relentless throb, and every cough felt like it was tearing my chest apart. Work was impossible. Staring at a screen of code felt like trying to decipher an ancient, forgotten language. I gave up and retreated to my couch, wrapping myself in every blanket I owned, surrendering to the waves of fever and chills. The world shrank to the size of my small living room. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the changing light outside my window and the increasingly miserable state of my body. For 2 days, I was a ghost in my own apartment. I subsisted on water and a few crackers I managed to force down. The silence of the apartment was punctuated only by my own wretched coughing. I felt utterly and completely alone, a feeling that was amplified by the fever-induced delirium. It was the kind of sickness that makes you feel profoundly pathetic, helpless in the most basic ways. Even getting up to get a glass of water felt like a monumental effort. On the third day, I must have been in a particularly rough state. I was half asleep on the couch, lost in a fever dream, when a fit of coughing seized me. It was a violent, rattling series of coughs that left me breathless and dizzy, my head pounding with the effort. I curled into a ball, pressing a pillow to my chest, just waiting for the world to stop spinning. And that's when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock on my door. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Who would be knocking on my door? I didn't have any deliveries scheduled, and my parents, who lived 2 states away, always called first. The knock came again, a little more firm this time. Hello? Lucas? You in there? The voice was muffled, but I recognized it instantly. It was Caleb. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Why was he here? Had my coughing been that loud? Was he here to complain? A jolt of anxiety shot through me, momentarily overpowering the sickness. I didn't want him to see me like this, a miserable, pajama-clad heap of germs. I tried to call out, to say I was fine, but my voice was a broken, croaking thing. I managed a weak, yeah, that was barely audible even to my own ears. Another violent cough followed, betraying my attempt to sound okay. There was a pause on the other side of the door. Then, his voice again, closer now, with a note of concern that I was definitely not imagining. Hey man, it's Caleb from across the hall. You sound rough. Everything all right? Dragging myself off the couch felt like climbing a mountain. I used the wall for support, my legs trembling, and made my way to the door. I remember thinking how ridiculous I must look, with my hair matted to my forehead with sweat and my eyes red and puffy. But there was nothing for it. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a crack. He stood there, holding a takeout container that was steaming gently. He was wearing a simple black Henley that stretched across his chest, and his expression was one of genuine worry. The easy, confident smile was gone, replaced by a slight frown of concern. He looked at me, taking in my pathetic state, and his eyes softened. Whoa, he said quietly. You look terrible. It was said not with judgment, but with a kind of gentle frankness. He held up the container. I heard you coughing pretty bad the last couple of days. Figured you might not be feeling up to cooking. I made some chicken soup. My mom's recipe. It's supposed to cure anything. He gave a small, almost shy smile. Or, at least not make it worse. I just stared at him, dumbfounded. Here was this person from my unattainable file, standing at my door with homemade soup. My fever-addled brain couldn't quite process it. I mumbled something that was probably supposed to be thank you, but likely sounded more like a groan. Can I come in? He asked, shifting his weight. Just to put this on the counter for you. You look like you're about to fall over. Without waiting for a real answer, he gently pushed the door open a little wider and stepped inside, his presence immediately making my small apartment feel even smaller. He moved past me toward the kitchen, and I was hit with that scent of his again. Not sawdust this time, but just something clean and warm, a scent that cut through the stale, sick-room air of my apartment. It was the moment that the world outside my illness breached the walls, and it was the moment everything started to change. He placed the soup on my kitchen counter and turned back to me. You should be in bed, man, he said, his voice soft. I just nodded, leaning against the doorframe, feeling dizzy. He took a step closer, and for a second, I thought he was going to put a hand on my arm to steady me. The thought sent a ridiculous jolt through my system, but he just gestured toward the living room. Go on, get back on the couch. I'll get you a bowl. I was too weak and too stunned to argue. I stumbled back to my nest of blankets while Caleb moved around my kitchen as if he'd been in it 100 times. I heard the clink of a bowl, the scrape of a spoon. It was surreal. This man, who had been a collection of hallway greetings and distant observations, was now portioning out soup for me. He was breaking all the rules of my carefully constructed world. He came back into the living room holding a steaming bowl, a spoon sticking out of it. Here, he said, holding it out. My hands were shaking so much I was afraid I'd spill it all over myself. I hesitated. He must have noticed, because his expression softened again. Easy. Let me help. He sat on the edge of the coffee table, placing the bowl down in front of me. The fragrant steam rose up, smelling of chicken and herbs, and something deeply comforting. It smelled like home. Look, he started, a little awkwardly. I know we don't really know each other. This is probably weird. But my sister's a nurse, and she's drilled it into my head that you don't let people suffer alone if you can help it. And you sounded like you were suffering. It's just a cold, I croaked, feeling the need to downplay my own misery. He raised an eyebrow. Lucas, I've had colds. This sounds like the plague. Just let a neighbor help, okay? The way he said my name felt different. Not just a label for the guy in 3B, but like he was actually talking to me. It made a strange warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the fever. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I felt a blush creep up my neck. Here he was, this vibrant, healthy person, taking time out of his evening to care for me. He wasn't just being polite. He was being actively, intentionally kind. It chipped away at the image I had of him, the one of the unapproachable, confident guy who lived in a different universe. This version of Caleb was quieter, more thoughtful. He picked up a book from my side table, a collection of poetry I'd been reading. He ran his thumb over the cover. Mary Oliver, he said, more to himself than to me. She's good. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? He quoted the line perfectly, then looked up at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I was floored. You read poetry? It was a stupid thing to say, a question loaded with all my unspoken assumptions about him. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Yeah, carpenters read sometimes, he said, though there was no bite to his words. My grandfather used to read it to me. He built things with his hands, too. He said you have to build things for the soul just as much as you build things for the house. He placed the book back down carefully. Anyway, eat your soup before it gets cold. That was it. That was the moment I realized how wrong I had been about him. He wasn't just a collection of masculine tropes. He was a person with a history, with a grandfather who read him poetry, with a gentleness that he kept tucked away behind that easy smile. He had a soul that needed building, too. I picked up the spoon, my hand still unsteady, and took a sip of the soup. It was perfect. The broth was rich and savory, the chicken tender, the vegetables soft but not mushy. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted, but maybe that was just because it was an act of such profound kindness. Each spoonful felt like it was healing me from the inside out. He stayed while I ate the whole bowl, not filling the silence with meaningless chatter, but just sitting there, offering a quiet, steady presence. He seemed to understand that I didn't have the energy for conversation. His being there was enough. When I was done, he took the empty bowl from me and carried it back to the kitchen. I heard the sound of running water as he rinsed it and placed it in the sink. He came back to the doorway of the living room, leaning against the frame. You need anything else? He asked. More water? Medicine? No, I managed to say, my voice a little stronger now. Thank you, Caleb. Really, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he said simply. And the way he said it felt like the truest thing I had ever heard. Get some rest, okay? I'll leave the rest of the soup in the fridge for you. Just heat it up. He gave me a small wave, and then he was gone. The soft click of my apartment door closing behind him, leaving a profound silence in its wake. I lay back on the couch, my body still aching, but my mind reeling. In the space of 20 minutes, Caleb had dismantled every assumption I'd ever made about him. He had crossed the hallway that I had viewed as an unbridgeable chasm, not with a grand gesture, but with a simple bowl of soup. He had shown me a glimpse of the man behind the facade I had created for him, a man who was kind and gentle and who quoted Mary Oliver. And as I drifted off into a real, restful sleep for the first time in days, I knew, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that I was in very, very deep trouble. The next day, I felt marginally more human. The fever had broken overnight, leaving me weak and drained, but with a clarity I hadn't had for days. The first thing I did when I woke up was think of Caleb. The memory of his presence in my apartment, of his quiet kindness, felt like a dream. But the container of leftover soup in my fridge was proof that it had been real. I spent most of the day in a state of hopeful anxiety. Every creak in the hallway made my heart jump. Would he knock again? Would I see him? What would I even say? Thank you felt inadequate. I replayed our brief conversation over and over, analyzing every word, every look. The poetry quote, the way he'd said my name. I was an archaeologist digging through the ruins of a 10-minute interaction, searching for artifacts of hidden meaning. Late that afternoon, there was another knock. My stomach did a nervous flip. I took a deep breath, ran a hand through my messy hair, and opened the door. It was him. He was holding a small paper bag. Hey, he said, that easy smile returning, but it seemed a little more genuine this time, a little less of a default setting. Feeling any better? Yeah, a lot better, I said, and it was true. My voice was still scratchy, but it was there. The soup was amazing. Thank you so much. Good, glad to hear it, he said. He held out the bag. I was at the store, and I remembered my mom always used to get me ginger ale and saltines when I was sick. Figured it couldn't hurt. I took the bag from him, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The contact was electric, a tiny spark that shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back probably a little too quickly. I saw a flicker in his eyes, but couldn't tell what it meant. Was it annoyance? Surprise? Or was it nothing? Just a product of my own hyper-aware imagination. You really don't have to keep doing this, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I know, he replied, his gaze steady. Just checking on my neighbor. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. So, a web developer, huh? Must be nice working from home. I'm always out on some dusty job site. It has its perks, I said, relaxing slightly. And its downsides. It gets a little quiet. I bet. He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. I think I'd go crazy. I need to be making things, you know? Hitting things with a hammer, he grinned, and I couldn't help but smile back. It was the first real smile I think he'd ever seen from me. Well, I make things too, I countered gently. It's just with code. It's like building, just with a different kind of material. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. Huh, I never thought of it like that. That's cool, he paused, then said, maybe when you're feeling 100%, you could show me some of your work? I'm trying to get a better website built for my business. And there it was. A door opening. An invitation to a future interaction, one that wasn't predicated on sickness or neighborly duty. Yeah, I said, maybe a little too eagerly. Yeah, I'd like that a lot. He smiled, a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes this time. Awesome. Well, I'll let you get back to recovering. Holler if you need anything. Seriously, and with another small wave, he was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it, the paper bag of ginger ale and crackers clutched in my hand. My apartment felt different now. It was no longer just my fortress. It was a place he had been, a place he had brought kindness into. And the hallway was no longer a chasm. It was just a hallway, a space that could be crossed. A hope, fragile and new, began to bloom in my chest, right alongside the fear that I was completely misreading everything. That evening, I heated up the last of the soup. I was still weak, my hands shaking a little as I carried the bowl to the couch. I sat down, wrapped in a blanket, and tried to eat. But a wave of dizziness washed over me, a lingering remnant of the fever. The room tilted slightly, and the spoon felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I set the bowl down on the coffee table, frustrated with my own body. I was so hungry, but the simple act of lifting a spoon to my mouth felt like too much effort. I must have been sitting there for a few minutes, just staring at the soup, when I heard another knock. My heart leaped. It was Caleb again. I opened the door, and he was standing there looking uncertain. Sorry to bug you again, he said quickly. I forgot to ask if you had any of that. Fever-reducing medicine. I have some if you need it. It felt like an excuse, a flimsy pretext to check on me one more time. I'm okay. I have some, I said, my voice quiet. I must have looked as exhausted as I felt, because his expression immediately shifted back to one of concern. Are you sure? You look pale. He glanced past me into the living room and saw the untouched bowl of soup on the coffee table. You haven't eaten, it wasn't a question. I felt a flush of embarrassment. I tried. I'm just really tired. A little shaky. Without a word, he stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Sit down, Lucas. His voice was gentle but firm. It wasn't a request. I did as he said, sinking back into the cushions of the couch. He walked over and sat on the coffee table again, facing me, just as he had the night before. He picked up the bowl, his movements sure and steady. "You need to eat," he said softly. He dipped the spoon into the broth, lifting it carefully. "You'll feel better if you have something in your stomach." He held the spoon out towards me. I looked at the spoon, then at his face. His eyes were focused on me, his expression unreadable but intense. The space between us felt charged, humming with an unspoken energy. I opened my mouth, and he gently guided the spoon in. The warm soup was a small explosion of comfort, but it was the act itself that sent a shock wave through me. The intimacy of it was staggering. A grown man being fed by another grown man. It felt ancient, primal, a gesture of pure care that stripped away all pretense. He fed me another spoonful, and then another. We didn't speak. The only sounds were the soft clink of the spoon against the bowl and my own breathing, which felt loud and ragged in my ears. With every spoonful, the barrier between us seemed to dissolve a little more. He wasn't just my neighbor anymore. He was something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for. He got about halfway through the bowl when he drew a spoonful that was mostly broth and brought it to his lips first. He blew on it gently, a soft puff of air, his gaze never leaving mine. It was such a tender, domestic gesture that my heart physically ached. He was about to offer it to me when he paused. The spoon hovered in the space between us. Something shifted in his eyes. The gentle concern was replaced by something deeper, darker, more complex. He looked from the spoon to my lips, then back again. The air grew thick, heavy. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming, a chaotic jumble of "what is happening?" and "please don't stop." Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the spoon. He brought the warm broth to his own mouth, sipping a small amount from the edge. He didn't swallow. He just held it there. Then, he leaned forward, closing the small distance between us. My world narrowed to the space of a few inches. All I could see were his eyes. All I could feel was the heat radiating from his body. My own body was frozen, caught between fight, flight, and a desperate, yearning stillness. His hand came up to cup the side of my neck, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. The touch was feather-light, but it grounded me, kept me from floating away. He tilted his head slightly, and then his lips were on mine. They were soft and warm, and they tasted of chicken soup. It wasn't a kiss, not in the way I had ever imagined a kiss. It was a transfer. He gently parted my lips with his and passed the warm liquid from his mouth to mine. The moment was both shockingly intimate and profoundly strange. It was an act of such vulnerability from both of us. My mind went completely blank. All thought was erased, replaced by pure sensation. The warmth of the broth, the impossible softness of his lips, the steady pressure of his thumb on my neck. It was over in a matter of seconds, but it felt like it stretched for an eternity. He pulled back slowly, his eyes searching mine. His lips were wet, his breathing a little unsteady. He looked as stunned as I felt. The spoon was still in his other hand, forgotten. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the thousand things we weren't saying. I swallowed the soup, the warmth spreading through my chest, but it was nothing compared to the fire he had ignited inside me. I had been sick with a cold, but in that single, bizarre, earth-shattering moment, I knew I had come down with something else entirely. Something far more dangerous and infinitely more wonderful. The moment stretched, taut and shimmering, like a soap bubble about to burst. Caleb's hand was still on my neck, his thumb frozen mid-stroke. His eyes were wide, a mirror of my own shock, and I could see the frantic pulse beating in his throat. He looked at my mouth, then up to my eyes, as if searching for a sign, a verdict. His lips parted slightly, as if he was about to say something, to explain, to apologize. But no words came out. Instead, he just pulled away. He didn't just pull his hand back. His whole body recoiled, as if he'd touched a live wire. He stood up so quickly that the coffee table wobbled, sloshing a bit of soup from the bowl onto its surface. He stared at the small spill, then back at me, his face a canvas of confusion and panic. I should go," he stammered, his voice rough. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the door, at the floor, at anywhere but my face. He backed away, one step, then two. "I'm sorry. I don't know. Get some rest." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence he left behind was heavier, more profound than before. It was a silence that rang with the echo of what had just happened. I sat there, frozen on my couch, my lips still tingling, the taste of chicken soup and Caleb still on my tongue. I raised my fingers to my mouth, the touch a faint ghost of his. It had been real. It had actually happened. The rest of that night and all of the next day were a special kind of torture. I was trapped in my apartment, my body still weak from the flu, but my mind was running a marathon. I replayed the moment from every conceivable angle. It was an endless, looping film in my head. The lean forward, the touch of his hand, the warmth of his mouth. What did it mean? That was the question that hammered at me until my head ached worse than it had from the fever. Was it a bizarre, misguided act of care from a straight man who had simply gotten carried away in a moment of nurturing? The thought was mortifying. Or was it something more? Was it a kiss disguised as something else? A test? A confession that was too terrifying to be made with words. Hope and fear waged a brutal war inside me. One moment, I would be soaring, convinced that the intimacy we had shared was undeniable, that it was a clear signal of his feelings. The look in his eyes right before, it hadn't been platonic. It had been charged with a longing that I recognized because I felt it myself. My heart would pound with a thrilling, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, the man from the unattainable file was not so unattainable after all. But then the fear would crash back in. I would picture his panicked retreat, the way he couldn't even look at me before he fled. That wasn't the action of a man confident in his feelings. It was the action of a man who had crossed a line and was horrified by it. Maybe he was disgusted with himself. Maybe he was disgusted with me. The shame of that possibility was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. I had been a passive participant, yes, but I hadn't pulled away. I had accepted it. Had he felt my acceptance? Had that been what scared him? I became hyper-aware of every sound from the hallway. When I heard his door open, I'd freeze, my breath catching in my throat. When I heard it close, I let out a sigh that was equal parts relief and disappointment. We were back to being two people separated by a hallway, but now the space was filled with a crackling, unspoken tension. The chasm had returned, wider and deeper than ever before. I avoided looking out my peephole. I stayed away from the door. I felt like a fugitive in my own home. The soup he had made sat in my fridge, a potent symbol of his kindness and the confusing, electrifying moment it had led to. I couldn't bring myself to eat it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. By the second day after the incident, I was physically much better. The sickness had receded, leaving behind only a lingering weakness. But emotionally, I was a wreck. The not knowing was excruciating. I knew I couldn't hide forever. I had to face him eventually. We were neighbors. I would see him taking out the trash, getting his mail. What would I do? Would we pretend it never happened? The idea of that felt impossible, like trying to pretend a lightning strike had been nothing more than a camera flash. I decided I had to be the one to break the silence. Maybe not by talking about it, but by just being normal. I would thank him again for his help and act as if nothing had happened. It was a cowardly plan, but it was the only one I had. That evening, I gathered my courage, took a deep breath, and opened my door to take out my recycling. And of course, at that exact moment, his door opened too. We both froze in our doorways, like two actors who had missed their cue. He was holding a trash bag. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, I saw the same panic and uncertainty I felt reflected back at me. He looked away first, his jaw tight. The silence was awful. It was thick and heavy and full of the unsaid. He took a step into the hall, moving towards the stairs, and I knew this was my chance. It was now or never. "Caleb," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. He stopped, his back to me. His shoulders were tense. He didn't turn around. "Yeah. I just wanted to thank you again," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "For everything. The soup, the ginger ale. You were a really good neighbor." I was sticking to the cowardly plan. I was giving him an out. A chance for us to reset, to go back to being just neighbors. He stood there for a long moment. I thought he was just going to nod and walk away, and a part of me desperately hoped he would. It would be easier. But then, he slowly turned around to face me. His face was a storm of emotions. He looked exhausted. "Lucas," he said, his voice low and strained. "We need to talk." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The verdict was coming. He took a step towards me, then another, until he was standing in the middle of the hallway, right between our two worlds. "Can I come in?" he asked, his eyes pleading. Please. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words, and stepped back to let him into my apartment for what felt like the 100th and most important time. The cowardly plan was dead. There would be no pretending. The lightning strike was about to be addressed. He walked into my living room, but didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the rug, turning to face me as I closed the door, shutting us in with the heavy, pulsing silence. The air felt thin, difficult to breathe. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. Look, he started, his voice low and raw. About the other night. I am so sorry. I completely crossed a line. It was not okay, and I freaked out, and I've been acting like an idiot ever since. If I made you uncomfortable, He trailed off, shaking his head, unable to finish the sentence. He couldn't meet my eyes. My heart sank. This was it. He was letting me down easy, apologizing for a moment of madness. The hope that had been a flickering candle flame inside me began to sputter. It's okay, I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash. Don't worry about it. No, he said, finally looking up, his eyes boring into mine. It's not okay. Because it wasn't nothing. My breath caught. He took a hesitant step closer. I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you for months, Lucas. Ever since I moved in. I'd see you in the hall, and you'd have this quiet, serious look on your face, and you'd just give me this tiny nod, and I would spend the rest of the day trying to figure out what you were thinking. He let out a shaky laugh, devoid of any humor. It was stupid. I didn't know what to say. You seemed so self-contained, so content in your world. I didn't want to bother you. And I figured. I just assumed you were straight. He gestured vaguely around the room. And then I heard you coughing. It sounded so awful, and all I could think about was you in here, sick and alone. It was the perfect excuse. A neighborly excuse to finally talk to you. To be in your space for a minute. He was closer now, close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the earnest plea in his dark eyes. Bringing you that soup, sitting here with you, it felt right, he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. It felt more right than anything has in a long time. And then the other night, seeing you so weak, so vulnerable. I don't know what happened. All the barriers in my head just crumbled. All the reasons I shouldn't, all the fear, it all just disappeared. And all I wanted to do was take care of you. He paused, his gaze dropping to my lips. That thing, with the soup, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. In my head, I was just going to feed you a damn spoonful of soup. But then I looked at you, and I just wanted to be closer. It was a stupid, clumsy, insane way of trying to, I don't know, kiss you without actually kissing you. Does that make any sense at all? Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. All the anxiety, all the fear of the last 2 days melted away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming relief, and something else, something so bright and powerful it almost hurt. Yes, I breathed out, the word a puff of air. It makes perfect sense. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Yeah, Caleb, I said, my voice finally steady and clear. I haven't been able to think about anything else. I thought I had imagined it all. I thought you were disgusted. Disgusted? He looked horrified. No. God, no, Lucas. I was terrified. Terrified of what I'd done. Terrified of what it meant. And mostly, terrified that I had completely ruined any chance I might have had with you. And then he closed the last bit of distance between us. His hands came up to cup my face, his palms warm against my skin. He was so gentle, as if he were holding something precious and fragile. Can I? He asked, his voice husky, his eyes searching mine for permission. Can I kiss you for real this time? No soup involved. I didn't answer with words. I leaned in and met his lips with mine. And this time, it was a real kiss. It was hesitant at first, a question asked and answered. But then it deepened, becoming sure and confident and full of all the unspoken things we had been feeling for months. It was a kiss full of longing and relief, of shared vulnerability and newfound hope. It wasn't about taking care or being taken care of anymore. It was about two people finally meeting in the middle of the hallway, no excuses or pretenses needed. It tasted of hope. It tasted like a beginning. In the weeks that followed, the hallway between our apartments became less of a barrier and more of a bridge. The doors to 3A and 3B were open more often than they were closed. My quiet, solitary world slowly and wonderfully merged with his. My apartment, once a fortress of solitude, was now often filled with the sound of his laughter, the scent of sawdust from his clothes, and the comfortable silence of two people just happy to be in the same room. We fell into a rhythm that felt both new and anciently familiar. We learned each other's habits, the small details that make a person whole. I learned that he hummed when he was concentrating, that he had a scar above his eyebrow from a childhood accident involving a treehouse, and that his confident exterior hid a deep-seated fear of disappointing the people he cared about. He learned that I needed a cup of tea before I could be fully human in the morning, that I organized my books by color, and that my quietness wasn't aloofness, but a habit born from years of feeling like I had nothing important enough to say. Our first real date was a week after the confession. He took me to his workshop, a large, dusty space that smelled of cedar and varnish. He showed me the pieces he was working on, a sprawling dining room table with intricate legs, a delicate rocking chair smooth as silk. He spoke about the wood with a reverence I had only ever reserved for a perfectly written line of code. I watched his hands, the same hands that had fed me soup, as they moved over the grain, and I understood what he meant about building things for the soul. This was his poetry, and I showed him mine. He'd come over and sit quietly on my couch while I worked, watching the lines of code appear on my screen. I explained what I was doing, how the abstract language built something tangible, something people could use and interact with. He didn't pretend to understand all of it, but he listened with a focused intensity that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. "It's amazing," he said one evening, shaking his head in wonder. "You're building a whole world that people can't even see. It's like magic." The relationship wasn't a sudden, dramatic fire. It was more like a slow, steady ember that grew brighter and warmer each day. We built our connection out of small moments, cooking dinner together in my tiny kitchen, falling asleep on the couch watching a movie, quiet conversations late into the night where we mapped out the territories of our pasts. The physical intimacy that followed was as gentle and as earnest as that first, real kiss. It was an extension of the care we had already shown each other, another language we were learning to speak together. A couple of months later, I came down with another cold. It was nothing serious this time, just a minor sniffle. I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket for dramatic effect more than anything else, when Caleb came in from his apartment carrying a steaming bowl. My heart did a familiar flip. He sat on the coffee table in front of me, a playful glint in his eye. "I believe this is my department," he said, his voice a low, teasing rumble. He held up a spoonful of the soup. "Now, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the other way." I laughed, a full, happy sound that echoed in the comfortable space between us. "I think I'll risk using the spoon myself this time," I said, taking the bowl from him. I leaned forward and gave him a soft, lingering kiss. "But thank you for the offer." He smiled against my lips. "Anytime," he whispered. "I'm pretty good at taking care of you." And he was. We both were. We took care of each other. Life is funny. You spend so much time building walls to protect yourself, creating routines to keep the world at a safe distance. You convince yourself that you are fine on your own, that solitude is safer than vulnerability. And then one day, someone shows up at your door with a bowl of soup, and they don't just break down your walls. They show you that you never needed them in the first place. All you ever needed was to be brave enough to open the door.